Aye. TVA's policy on floating homes. I've asked Rebecca Tolene, TVA's Vice President of Natural Resources, to present this item. Rebecca?
Thank you, Director McWhorter. I appreciate that. I think I need it. Based on the listening session this morning and the comments we've received, we know this is a very difficult issue, particularly for marina owners and floating house owners. I'm going to echo our appreciation on behalf of TVA for the members of the public who either traveled here today to provide comments or have provided comments at numerous other forums that we've had with folks. Their professionalism and the points they made and the way they did that, have a lot of respect for that. Dialogue, I've even been invited to a couple front porches. I don't know if that's good or bad, but we definitely want to continue. You know, I'll mention, Bill mentioned it in his President's report, and the TVA board adopted a land policy in 2006, and that policy stated that it's TVA's policy to preserve reservoir lands in public ownership. And the policy went on to state that TVA would not allocate public land or land rights for residential use. And so today what we're doing is proposing steps to bring this thinking to the same reservoir land, just this land is inundated by water. We began a review of floating homes in April 2014. New structures have been prohibited since 1978, transferring those permits, and that has been allowable since 1978, but no new structures have been permitted. We began to see a growing number of these just popping up on the reservoirs, and we started receiving marketing materials from developers who were seeking to build entire subdivisions on the water. These new structures were built without permits. Some would add a motor and a boat sticker on them and call them boats and say that they're outside of TVA's regulations. Yet these are very different structures. They're non-navigable, they're moored in one location. So out there, review our regulations and think about the future of our reservoirs. I think what we all have are beautiful and special places, and we only have to step outside, making sure all members of the public can enjoy this resource. Access ramps, fishing piers, public parks, campgrounds, trails. We know that the demands on this resource are only going to increase in the future, and so what we're trying to do is seek a balance between that public resource and a reasonable approach to regulation for the folks we heard from today. Our purpose here today, we've spent a lot of time and effort trying to develop a policy that's fair. We've worked hard to have a transparent process, and today we are going to be requesting the board adopt a policy that will help TVA better manage our reservoirs and benefit the public that we serve. The policy covers about 4 primary areas: a prohibition against new structures, standards to mitigate environmental and safety concerns, a fee structure so that the ratepayers would not be paying for the regulation of these privately owned structures, and some period of time when the structures will be removed from the reservoirs to allow others to enjoy the reservoirs in these spaces. Today, through our work with the External Relations Committee of the board and going through all of these comments, we're proposing an adjustment based on our input as part of our ongoing effort to balance the interests of those who have these structures and those that we serve that do not have these structures. I'll give you just a bit of background. I know you've heard a lot about this today. The top left, smaller structure you see there is what we refer to as a non-navigable houseboat. These are typically smaller structures, although some have been rebuilt and made larger. These existed in some form 40 years ago in 1978. At that time, the TVA board said no more, but it gave after the fact revocable permits to the ones that were in place in 1978. The bottom picture on the left depicts a more modern floating house. Many of these structures are just what they look like, a residential house with all these residential amenities floating on the water. The picture to the right shows the path this issue was moving toward, full subdivisions on the lake. Marinas more like subdivisions than recreation providers, and that was one of our concerns. So we actively engaged the public in this process. We reviewed various alternatives through our environmental review process, and again, we had numerous public meetings. We talked with marina associations, individual marina owners and floating homeowners, elected officials. As you heard today, we met with the Regional Resource Stewardship Council. We had an interagency team of federal and state agencies. And obviously, we talked with the general public, accepting comments via email, phone, and on our website. So the most prevalent issues raised and concerns are reflected in some of these photos. Water quality and discharges from floating houses, electrical safety, mooring safety, and the private use of a public resource, one individual controlling a piece of the public reservoir. We also heard comments about TVA needs to share the blame and should not have allowed these floating homes or should have been better at enforcing regulations about these floating homes. Floating homeowners, as you've heard this morning, desperately want them to remain, expressing concerns about individual financial impacts and economic development impacts to their communities. The non-floating homeowners who commented as part of our process generally supported removal, with a number of those supporting some kind of sunset period. Almost all the entities who commented and that I've spoken to do support revised rules and standards. So again, obviously, the most controversial of these provisions is the proposed sunset period after the 20 years. I have two sides. Many members of the public do not understand why we would grant these private structures an additional 20-year tenure, while the owners of these structures would like approval to remain on the reservoirs in these locations permanently. So our recommendation to you today, we did try to listen to folks, concerns over loans and being able to enjoy their investment, concerns about the economic impacts. After discussions with the committee, and I will say both to the committee and the individual board members, we appreciate the amount of time and energy and thought that you have all put into this issue. We are proposing a 30-year sunset period. This is a long time, but we believe this proposal goes even further to mitigate the impacts on owners and marina operators where they are located. To accept the idea that no sunset is appropriate and that these structure owners own a piece of the reservoir that they can transfer in perpetuity just isn't a place that seems like good stewardship. We also believe this is fair due to the fact that the longest term we have with a marina operator throughout the valley is 30 years. And that this time period will give folks time to enjoy their investments, personally or through rentals, and we believe it reflects the responsible economic useful life of these structures. So the policy we are asking you to adopt would prohibit new floating houses, clarify that all floating homes need a permit for TVA, and require existing floating homes to meet TVA standards. Todd, if you can flip, thank you. So these are some of the standards we've been working on, as you can see there. Ground fault circuit protection on the electrical, wastewater treatment rules, no expansion of structures, making sure we have the right insurance in place, and making sure when these are transferred that the TVA permit and prior written approval is required by TVA. We would be asking you to direct staff to develop standards along these lines and a cost recovery program for floating house structures and issue draft regulations. Those draft regulations would be available for public comment. You would be authorizing the amendments to the 26A regulations to implement this policy, and you would be directing staff to do an additional review of reasonable restraints on transferability and report to the board in 6 months. And that's really about us continuing this dialogue about options for the floating homeowners and to try to figure out if there's any win-win in this situation. I'll say, you know, TVA had a similar issue on campgrounds, where individuals were using these public campsite resources as their private campground. With the support of the board and communities throughout the valley, we worked hard and implemented rules to ensure that these resources are available for all the public and don't become the domain of one person. We believe we need to continue that work in our reservoirs, but we also want to work with the communities we serve. through new, innovative ways to bring economic vitality and development to our reservoir communities, because they have something special and something that calls to visitors all over the world and to our local communities. We look forward to that work, and we look forward to continuing that dialogue to help our reservoir communities be successful. So, considering all the issues that we have heard relating to floating homes and the work we've done with the committee, we are today recommending the adoption of the floating house policy as presented to you in your books. Again, the primary means of implementing the policy would be through our regulations. We would issue draft regulations, and those would be available for public comment. Thank you for the opportunity to present today.
Thank you, Rebecca. You did an excellent job with that. The committee has reviewed this item now, and a majority of the committee has voted to recommend approval. I want to go on record here as being as respectful as I can to the committee members and the committee that I chair, but I will plan to vote against this item. While I do agree with the policy's proposals to improve regulation of these structures, I do not believe a sunset period is warranted at this time. I believe that's something we could adopt later, but I would like to see us delay that kind of decision. I think the speakers that were here today have said everything that they could possibly say. I don't think I could add anything to their arguments, but I am sympathetic to their position. TVA has spent some considerable time developing these proposals to address the environmental and safety issues associated with the floating homes. However, as I said, I would just prefer to spend a little more time to see if we could find additional alternatives to adopting a sunset period. In any event, I understand the perspective of my fellow colleagues on the committee, and certainly we've just agreed to disagree and be respectful about it. So at this point in time, there is a motion, but there is a recommendation, but given my position, I don't think I should be the one to make a motion.
Thanks, Mike. Do we have a motion to approve the floating house policy behind tab 9 in your notebook?
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, we are now in discussion. Before we begin this discussion, please understand, the members of the audience, that we have had a lot of disagreement on this subject. I want to make it absolutely clear, I do not believe in our role as management of the river. We have the right to give something that would last forever. I agree fully with Bill on that subject. I also think that we run into some legal issues that may prohibit that separately, even if we did own the river. But again, we just manage the river. So I'm going to open the floor for discussion. I'm going to encourage everyone to be respectful, because again, this is probably the most contested issue I have seen in my entire time on this board, but this board is very respectful of each other and understand sometimes we do disagree. So let's, does anyone have any discussion items? Marilyn?
Well, I'd like to, again, of course, by echoing gratitude for everyone coming out and telling us their views on this issue. I have heard and learned a lot about the lax TVA enforcement and the possibly misleading communications about its land policy. Plus, I have a new appreciation from the information I heard this morning about the sizable economic hardship that a proposal might, a 30-year term, might impose on homeowners, on marinas, and on communities. I feel I need more time to digest this information, and so I would like to propose that we table the vote on this motion until our next meeting.
I would second that, Mr. Chair.
I want to make sure I have the procedure right. Sherry, would you please tell us what the appropriate procedure for motion to table till the next meeting?
According to Robert's Rules of Order, the proper motion would be a motion to postpone. for consideration at a time certain, which would be at the next meeting, as I understand your motion.
That's, that is the motion. Thank you.
The motion is to postpone till the next meeting, which is the time certain. Do we have a second on that motion? Is that the correct? Excuse me a second.
Does the motion to postpone supersede the motion that's already on the floor? Sure.
There she is. You might ought to stay there. I think this might.
I think the proper course is you've got a second on the motion to postpone, correct?
Yes.
Ask for discussion on that, then take a vote on that. Depending on the fate of that motion, you will either vote or not on the main motion.
All right. Okay, we do have a second on the motion. It is open for discussion. Again, please try not, let's one at a time. Does anybody have any comments?
Well, again, I would just say this. I would like to have more time to study about this. I think we've heard a tremendous amount of information today. And frankly, while a lot of that I had gotten already in other letters and emails from people, they put a fresh light on some of the issues for me, and I would truly like to have a little while longer to digest all that I heard here, and frankly seek Rebecca's counsel are there any other alternative options before we take action. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is clear TVA has made a mess out of this for 40 years, and I'm not sure we can solve it today, and I'm not sure we can solve it in the August meeting, but it needs to be solved for everybody's sake, and apologize. We weren't on the board. Bill was not around, and I don't know exactly. Rebecca was not around in those days, so I know this has really created, our inactivity has created an economic monster for both TVA and for the people who are affected by it. So, I would second that. And Marilyn, I appreciate you making that motion.
Pete?
I have a few comments I want to make. I want to start by saying that perpetual ownership of property on public land, public property, I just cannot see how that is in any way permissible or possible. I was thinking, as listening to these discussions, I have a brother that's been out, spent his adult life in the American West, much of which is owned by the public, and they fight over the use of public lands out there all the time. They've been doing it for 100 years, but they seem to do it much better than we do here. But TVA has created this monster, and I can support delaying a decision until the next board meeting, at which time we deal with it. Has TVA handled it well? Absolutely not. I will have to say that I really felt sorry for some of the speakers today, but there were others that I didn't, that if they didn't know better, they absolutely should have. Buying a piece of property on land on which you do not have a title opinion, that's not a good idea.
Any further comment? Excuse me.
Joe, I'd like to say one other thing too. Ladies and gentlemen, I know there have been some pretty pointed comments directed towards Rebecca Tolene, and I can tell you from being on this committee and how she has handled herself and presented this item to us, she has gone out of her way to be as fair as she possibly can. So when she shows you some pictures of some abusive houses out there, let me assure you she has also shown us pictures of places that look like they probably belong more at Disney World. Really well landscaped, really well maintained. And I think Rebecca has made every effort to be as fair about this as possible. So don't kill the messenger.
Yes.
That I can second.
Yes, well, there's no motion on that part, but anyway, any other comments? I do have a few. There were many, many questions in my mind after listening to the speakers today. I don't have any idea who's right, who's wrong. I have gone into this thinking 30 years was a pretty good start. I heard a lot of speakers today that said things like, it hurts me today. No, it really doesn't hurt you today. And we are trying to solve a very complicated problem, and there are not going to be any great solutions. Nonetheless, the issues that were raised that I wrote down and would hope to get the answers from TVA, they're not possible to answer today, will lead me to where I believe that we should be delaying this to the August board meeting. So do we have any other further comments? We have a motion on the table to postpone until the August board meeting the motion that was made by the External Affairs Committee. All in favor of the motion to delay, say aye. Aye. That's, how many, 4? Raise your hand so I can see. All opposed?
All right.
Is that 5? The motion fails. We now have the original motion to consider the matter that was presented by the External Affairs Committee back on the table. So that is back open for discussion. I believe that's the correct word. Rich, here you go. So we're now open discussion for that item. Is that correct? Okay, we're now discussing the item that was presented by the External Affairs Committee.
So, Joe, if I may.
Yes.
First, I want to thank everybody who came out and spoke to us. Clearly a lot of emotion, a lot of passion, a lot of love for the respective communities that you have made your home, either permanently or in the summer. After listening to, I don't know, close to 40 speakers, I didn't think I was going to hear anything new. And then one gentleman who got up towards the end, who said everybody else said what he came to say, actually used the phrase right and fair. And that had not been used up until that point, but it's what I have written on my own piece of paper. And unfortunately, what's right and what's fair don't always line up exactly. You've heard mention of the land policy now several times. I also have that in front of me, and it's highlighted. I'm not going to reread it to you. What I think is right, and I say I because I don't know what's, if anyone wonders about sort of whether or not these votes are in any way, quote unquote, fixed, I can tell you right now, I have no idea what the outcome of this vote is going to be. And so when I'm speaking for me. What is right, in my view, is that we enforce the land policy. But what is also correct is that we have blundered over time such that folks face real potential investment loss. I think by providing for a 30-year sunset period, we buy ourselves time, all of us. And I believe the burden is on us, the TVA, to help mitigate any economic loss that may be suffered as a result of our inactions in the past and any actions we may take today. I feel strongly that the value of the decisions we make accrues to the public, to the many, not to the few. Another phrase we heard a couple times. And in my view, the problem with grandfathering the existing floating homes in perpetuity is that it creates just the opposite result. We were asked to use our hearts and not our heads in making this decision. I understand that request. I wish I could do that. But in the end, I feel that what is the right thing for us to do as stewards of this land is to enforce the policy that's on paper. And what is fair is to provide the necessary time needed to ensure we haven't brought economic devastation to those who have invested their retirement savings, in some cases, in this personal property. And I can only tell you that for me, as we look at this over the next 6 months, year, 2 years, we will explore every way possible to make sure we mitigate the economic hardship that this decision may or may not create. Thank you.
Are there any further comments?
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Lynn?
Yes, thank you. I too want to thank the floating house and marina owners who've taken time to speak during the public listening session today. You have put a face to the many comments, emails, letters, and phone calls we've all received related to this matter. Comments similar to those made today were taken into consideration by management and the External Relations Committee and to each of us as we've reviewed the information related to this matter. And we acknowledge that removal should not be enforced immediately because confusing information was evidently shared with some of you by TVA over the years. Therefore, giving 30 years additional time to enjoy the resources that you're taking advantage of now or you're enjoying now seems to be very reasonable and fair in my opinion. As a board, when we think about the sunset provision, I don't know that I think that we will probably consider to continue to agree to disagree on a sunset provision, and that's why I did not support a delay. I think that that's an item that 3 months from now we'll still be disagreeing on whether there should be a sunset provision or not. I think that as a board, our actions should support maintaining the public resources for public use, and I, for one, am going to support the recommendation that's being made out of the External Relations Committee. Thank you.
Do we have any other speak?
Yeah, I'm going to comment as well. I voted for us to delay the decision, but if the majority of the board feels like that they have sufficient information to make a decision, then I'm going to vote for the motion as presented.
Further comments?
I just agree with Lynn and Eric's comments and feel as many of the floating home owners expressed today, you know, our laxness in the past is sort of what's created this problem. I feel like the sunset provision is, it's time that we took action to quit delaying that. And I agree with both Lynn and Eric that we do have time, and we will continue to use time to find ways that there may be a model for us to move forward that is satisfactory to the homeowners and to TVA too. So it ain't over till it's over.
I think we're about to make it.
And just today, you know, our laxness in the past is sort of what's created this problem. I feel like the sunset provision is, it's time that we took action to quit delaying that. And I agree with both Lynn and Eric that we do have time, and we will continue to use time to find ways that there may be a model for us to move forward that is satisfactory to the homeowners and to TVA too. So it ain't over till it's over.
I think we're about to make it.
And Joe, can I make one last comment? I appreciate everything that everybody said on the board. Lynn, one thing you said that kind of triggered with me, I know we're going to agree to disagree on a sunset provision, and I want to echo what everybody said. Somewhere we have to craft some kind of solution that does not give perpetuity or eternity rights. Bill, I understand that. I'm just not satisfied yet that I've had enough time to thoroughly think this through, and that's why I would have rather gone to August before we took dramatic action here today. I totally agree with all the recommendations of the committee, except I'm just not comfortable with it as long as it has the sunset provision in it as it stands.
Do we have further discussion? I have a few points I would like to make. First is, as I said earlier, I don't think we have the right to do what was requested, and that's provide a permanent grandfathering clause, and I think we would run into many, many issues if we tried that again. That's not our river. We just manage it. We have had lengthy discussions that started off at 20 years due, but I also, if you noticed in there, there's a provision that our TVA staff is going to spend the next 6 months meeting with stakeholders, preparing regulations, and learning more and more about it. There's always that chance that something we miss so completely would lead to us reconsidering a particular matter. But right now, the motion on the table, do we have any further discussion, is as presented by Rebecca.
I have one more comment.
Yes, sir.
Before I attended my first TVA board meeting 3.5 years ago, somebody told me that board meetings are all cut and dried. Everybody knew in advance how they're going to go. We sure proved that to be a lie, haven't we?
Well, and one other comment Pete always made is, you know, if the board is always unanimous, then they only need one.
Well, I wish there were none on this issue, but we have the motion. We have a second. I think discussion is over. All in favor? Aye. Aye. Opposed? No. 2. I think it passed on a 7-2, and we again appreciate all that took the time to be here, and we will continue to listen to this issue for, I believe, a long time to come.